I am Father David Hollenbach, Director of the Center for Human Rights and International Justice and Professor of Theological Ethics here at Boston College. And it is my privilege to welcome you to this conference on migration, past, present, and future, which is part of the celebration of the 150th anniversary of the founding of Boston College. Migration, especially of Irish Catholics to the Boston region, was a formative reality in BC's origins and history. A forthcoming study of BC's history tells us that of the young men who were members of the first class to enroll at Boston College in 1963, almost two-thirds of them were either immigrants themselves or children of immigrants. So BC's origin was closely connected to the reality of immigration. We will be hearing more about the linkage between Boston College's history and the reality of migration at lunchtime tomorrow from Professor James O'Toole, who is writing a history of Boston College and is going to tell us about the migration dimensions of BC's history in his lunchtime speech tomorrow. The issue of immigration is also a crucial question for the United States and many other countries today. One indicator of that reality is that more than 200 million people are living in countries other than the country where they were born in our world today. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, former Prime Minister of Portugal, has declared, and I quote, "At few times in history have so many people been on the move as are moving today." They are fleeing from war as refugees and as internally displaced people. They are seeking to escape the reality of poverty. They're fleeing the damaging effects of climate change in some parts of the world. And many are simply trying to find a better life for themselves and their families. The growing inequality of global economic resources and their distribution in our world suggests that the future is likely to put even greater pressure on people to migrate in the future than is the case today. Tomorrow morning in this conference, we will hear about refugees and about those fleeing poverty. We will hear about the influence of race and class on the contemporary reality of migration. And in the afternoon tomorrow, we will have a very lively roundtable chaired by Ray Juarez of Public Television, a lively roundtable debate about how we should shape public policy to create more just responses to migration in the future. Tonight, though, we are privileged to have with us Richard Rodriguez to reflect on the experience of the effects of migration on many who have come to this country. Richard Rodriguez has written an autobiographical trilogy, including 3 books named The Hunger of Memory, Days of Obligation, an argument with my Mexican father, and Brown, The Last Discovery of America. These books grapple with how ethnicity, class, race have shaped his experience within the immigrant Latino community in the United States. His new book, The Desert God, a spiritual autobiography, will be published this coming October. I am sure that we are in for a moving presentation from Richard Rodriguez tonight, since he presents his important ideas in such moving ways, as is evident from the fact that his works have been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, for the National Book Critics Award, and his PBS NewsHour essays on American life have received the Peabody Award, one of television's highest honors. So please join me in welcoming Richard Rodriguez, who will address for us tonight the topic called "The Border is Not a Straight Line." Richard. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, but I'm going to say, first of all, something I didn't put on my notes, that I want to dedicate these remarks to my parents, my Mexican parents, whose bravery and valor brought me to America and made me an American son. But already there is in that description an irony that if you are the son of immigrants, you end up in this country very different from your parents. And there is a toll to be paid for becoming an American if your parents are foreign-born. And it's often told in long silences in the House. It's curious about how many immigrants are here in our present, and they never talk about the past. They sit quietly next to us, and we never know they have come from such a long journey. The only thing I knew, and I knew this only when she was dying, my 7th grade teacher told me that she was Mexican. This Irish woman, in fact, a group of Irish nuns came across the ocean in the year in which the Irish quota to the United States was filled, and so they went to Mexico. They became Mexican citizens, and they entered the United States with Mexican passports. So I was educated by Irish Mexican women. One of the ironies of history, there are so many that I stand here at this college, which was founded for and by Irish Americans, who have been so much a part of my life, is that the argument against the Irish coming to this country by nativists in the 1860s was Mexico. War was brewing with Mexico, and the argument was that if you let the Irish in as fellow Catholics, they would unite with the Mexicans to overturn the Protestant state. In fact, this story is nowhere told. You never hear of it, even on St. Patrick's Day, even in a bar on Madison Avenue. No one remembers it. But a number of young Irish men went to fight in the Mexican-American War, and they changed sides. They ended up fighting for Mexico. Mexico remembers them to this day. They were called the San Patricios, the St. Patrick's Brigade. A number of them were apprehended and hung on the Zocalo of Mexico City until their eyes opened and they stared at the sky. But they were true Irish, true Mexican patriots to this day. The Mexican president will salute the Irish ambassador on the plaza in Mexico City, will salute Ireland, unless he's in jail. The Mexican president will salute Ireland, Viva Irlanda. No one in America remembers it. We don't remember it because we used to be Irish a long time ago. But now we're sort of gringo, and now we don't remember very much. And we have to be reminded of who our grandparents and our great-parents were, what this one nation was. The women who educated me, these Irish women, were the first women who I began to think about when I thought about migration. A lot of the things that go on now in the world, in fact, in many ways, the story of migration in the world is the story of women, girls, grandmothers. Boys are not traveling in quite the same numbers anymore. We used to think of the migrant as the cowboy on the horse. I was at a college recently in Ohio where the alumnus had left some money to the college so that students could go en masse. These are students who could not afford to travel internationally. And they would go to Bolivia. They would go to a third world country. They would go to Cambodia. And they would do something together, give something to those countries for 2 or 3 months or weeks. And the day that I was at this college, the students came back. And it was Diversity Week, which is usually when I get invited to Diversity Week. I'm Mr. Diversity. And the group from Bolivia came out to the stage, and they told us about their adventure. They're really cool kids. And the student body president, who was male, showed us these snakeskins that he brought back. He was really proud of the snakeskins. There were two boys, and all the rest of them were girls. There were like 10 girls, 2 boys. And I thought, that's kind of odd. The 2 boys were alpha males. In the audience were these guys who were just kind of hunched over thinking about the next video game. The next group came out from Cambodia. They were all women. They had planted a soccer field in Cambodia. They were all women. I said to the organizer later, I said, why is it that the women are going on this journey and the boys are not? It turns out that 2 out of 3 of the students who take advantage now of study abroad programs are girls. Boys are staying home. There are those of you who are perhaps here tonight for extra credit or because you have to be here, but you should wonder what that sexual energy is in the world and why it has changed. More than half of the migrants in the United States today are women. More than half. Internationally, it's about 49%. They are traveling everywhere in the world and often without a male. Barack Obama. I do not think we live in the great civilization of Barack Obama. I think we live in the great civilization of his mother, Ann Dunham. Barack Obama has described his mother as being reckless, but I think of her as completely modern and to this moment. She was born in Kansas, in Blonde, Kansas, and something in her there is hungry for the round world, for a world that she does not know. She goes to college and she becomes an anthropologist. She wants to know that world. She wants to ask questions of it. She marries a man from Kenya, a Muslim. Blonde, Protestant Kansas marries black, Muslim Africa. The marriage doesn't work. They have a son, Barack. You would think, if you were sort of like me, a kind of lazy male, you would think she would say, well, that's enough of that adventure. I'm going to find Robert Redford or something. She goes to Indonesia. She goes to Indonesia and she confronts a Muslim country, the largest Muslim country in the world, a tropical Islam. She marries there again. Her son is sitting in Oak Park in Chicago being interviewed by the Time magazine. His eyes are already on the White House. This brown man knows already what he wants. He wants to be the first black president, and he says of his mother, she was reckless. Well, I think to myself, something in us has to be reckless if we are going to take the journey that she took. I don't think we should be afraid to sexualize the drama that we are seeing. The woman who cuts my hair every 3 weeks. She came to the United States from Japan. She was middle class. She is the only one who came, not her brothers, her 2 older brothers, who are still in Japan. She came. She got a green card, she got an American husband, and then she got an American divorce. She gave birth to a beautiful daughter who learned to play the cello. And now that daughter is living in Berlin and is dating a Russian fashion model who lives in Milan, who sounds like bad news. And I said to her, why did you leave? Why did you leave Japan? You love your parents. You Skype your parents now. You go visit them all the time. Why did you leave? And how could you leave by yourself? She stops cutting my hair. She looks in the mirror at herself or at both of us. And she said, why did I leave? Just because. There are a lot of people, sometimes when we talk about migration, we don't realize that it is not always desperation that is moving people from place to place. But sometimes it is also curiosity. Sometimes it is something so deep in the heart about knowing the stranger. I've always dreamt of going to that country. I've always dreamt of learning that language. I've always dreamt of the snow. I've always dreamt of the tropics. I've always dreamt of something other than I am. I want not to meet myself in the world. I want to meet the stranger. Just because. Ann Dunham. When I go to Juarez, Mexico, which is a very dangerous city, maybe it has been called lately the most dangerous city in the world, because of the drug traffic, because of the Mexican billionaires we have created with our drug habit. We have destabilized Bolivia, Afghanistan, Thailand, Colombia, Guatemala, and we have destabilized Mexico. I can't go to sleep without I can't have sex. I can't get out of bed without my. You go to Juarez, Mexico, and there are factories all over the city. And they are filled with migrants who are not coming across to the United States tonight. They're working assembling Korean televisions. They're nimble fingers, sewing French jeans for us. Something happened in Juarez, Mexico, about which not too much is ever said. But young Mexican women, barely women, started coming from villages in Mexico, started going to the maquiladora in Juarez. And on their way home at 2 a.m. on the company bus, they would be let out in some shantytown village, and they would be murdered. 1, 10, 100, 1,000. There are so many dead in Juarez, Mexico, so many migrant women dead, that no one knows how to keep count. Every once in a while, the desert wind comes in and blows the sand, and there are bodies in the sand. Look, there's an arm coming out of the sand. What I want to tell you right now is that it takes a certain bravery to migrate in the world. And if you are a woman, it takes a certain courage and defiance. You may get shot in the head if you go to school. But I also don't want you to think that tomorrow we will only be talking about the poor. The very rich are in migration right now. The very, very rich. In London, I know this neighborhood in Knightsbridge where the Russians have moved in. The super, super rich Russians with their ill-gotten or well-gotten billions. And they have bought these Edwardian houses, and the neighbors are all abuzz about it. And my friend said, well, I don't know who they are, she said. And they're black cars and they're fashion models. They come and go at all kinds of hours, she says. And that beautiful house, that beautiful flat, she said, you know, they put a swimming pool on the roof. The Russians are there because it is safer to be there. The Russians and the rich Filipinos and the rich Pakistanis and the rich Brazilians, they are all over the world. And the rich Chinese are leaving China for safer countries. Do not think migrants are only poor. Do not think that migrants are not also middle class. Do not think that migrants are also women. There is a town north of San Diego called La Jolla. It is a beach town. It is about 10 miles from San Diego. It's a very beautiful, very wealthy beach town over the Pacific. Ex-Governor Mitt Romney and his wife live in a house there overlooking the Pacific. It is the house, the famous house, where he has installed an elevator for his cars. Next door, down the street, there are Mexicans. There are Mexicans all over La Jolla. And you say, well, but nobody's mentioned that. Nobody at Boston College, we had the seminar on migration. Nobody talked about the rich Mexicans in La Jolla. They're there. You don't see very much of them. They live behind walls. They have children who have beautiful teeth. Rich people always have children with beautiful teeth. And the children play tennis. That's not why we're exactly here tonight. We're here because of the leaf blower. Do you hear that noise, leaf blower at 7 in the morning? In La Jolla, at 7 in the morning with his leaf blower. He turns out to be this stocky Mexican. He must be Mexican. This stocky guy, about 45 years old, blowing the leaves, making a racket outside. We're here because we don't know what to make of him. Is he legally here? Does he have a green card? Does he have a driver's license? If we got in a crash with him, does he have insurance? Why is he here? Who is paying? Do I end up paying for the fact that he's paid less by his rich employers? The migration of the poor. I guess that's why we're here, to talk about the leaf blower. I want to say something. I have impersonated a journalist over my life, and I have been on the Mexican-U.S. border many nights, particularly when it was easier to cross. And I have seen the world crossing. I've seen Chinese, Yugoslavs when they used to be Yugoslavs. I've seen Pakistanis. I've seen Latin Americans of every sort crossing that line. And I have seen Mexicans. I've seen Mexican women in high-heeled shoes holding babies. I have seen kids, not teenagers, kids, coming across, sometimes without any adults. Huck Finn. And I thought to myself, I am watching some spectacle of a human journey. It's almost biblical. And here I am with a film crew from the BBC. This should be Cecil B. DeMille. This should be the 10 Commandments. This is so large. I want to talk about dreaming. What else are writers for except to talk about dreaming? Writers don't know anything. We know nothing. But we know dreams. And when I meet people, I always ask them about their dreams. What did they dream? I asked this man. By the way, when it gets reported in the Boston Globe or the New York Times that people are crossing the border tonight, they are usually identified as Hispanics. But most of the people I see crossing look like me. They look more Indian than they look Spanish. They don't look like people walking down a boulevard in Madrid. They look Indian. The nose, the lips, the eyes, almost Asiatic. And I think to myself, why do we keep calling them Hispanics? There is a migration along the trail that extends now into South America of Indians on the move. Guatemala, Bolivia, Ecuador, people who look like me, short, not European, maybe mixed blood, but Indian. We say of Barack Obama, he's mixed blood, and we say he's black. We say of the Indian who has Spanish blood that she's Hispanic. I'm not Hispanic. Soy Indio. And they're coming. And I think to myself, is it possible, I say to myself, is it possible that there's a large Indian migration coming from Latin America, one of the great Indian marches, that we do not have a way to describe because we don't have words to describe? All we have is Hispanic. Let it pass. Don't concern yourself with it. I ask him, where are you going? He says to me, he's wearing running shoes, he's wearing 2 pairs of underwear, 3 shirts, a sweater and a jacket. He has no suitcase. He says he wants his hands free in case he has to crawl into America. In case he has to crawl into America. He has a note, look. He has a note with an address in Atlanta, Georgia. There is a job waiting for him in Atlanta, Georgia, plucking dead chickens. That's why he's on the journey. The journey has taken him from Guatemala, from a village in Guatemala, in the jungle, across the Mexican border, which is very dangerous. Mexican thieves and Mexican police, sometimes the same person, will prey on you. And you better keep quiet because Mexicans hear a Guatemalan accent. And all the pity they require of the United States, they do not give other immigrants coming through their country at all. He is coming to the United States. He will get to the border tonight. He will cross a border that is increasingly dangerous, not because of a wall, which has gaps in it, and which can be scaled in many places, but because there is a job in Atlanta, Georgia, plucking dead chickens. He will have to cross the desert. He has heard tales of the desert, of becoming so crazed in the desert sunlight that men have gone around in circles, circles and circles, and they have found their dead bodies in the morning as the circle becomes constricted to a corpse. And I think to myself, it is astonishing how gaudy the dreams of the very poor are. I want to pluck chickens in Atlanta, Georgia. No one talks about the Federalist Papers or the Declaration of Independence. No one talks about the freedoms of America. People talk about a job. America is a hammer. I'm going to hold a hammer. Bang! I'm going to build something. I'm going to be paid for building. America is a saw. America is a broom. I'm going to push America. The assurance of it in my fist. When I grew up in California, all the interesting people coming to California were all migrants, but they were coming from Illinois and Kansas and Nebraska. They were what the sociologists call internal immigrants. They were people who were getting away from their in-laws. And it turned out that they were the interesting Californians. All the famous Californians were from somewhere else. Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz, Walt Disney, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was from Illinois, I think. Our native Californian was Dick Nixon, who was this dour, dark-faced politician. The other native Californian we had was Marilyn Monroe, who faded, her beauty faded, and she died one night in Brentwood, California, either from an overdose or from murder. We still don't know. One of the most famous native Californians we have now is Steve Jobs. There's an apple corner up there, the Steve Jobs Memorial Chapel up there. I can see all those little apples in honor of Steve Jobs, like votive lamps in a chapel. Steve Jobs was like me. I live 1 mile in San Francisco from the hospital where I was born, a hospital which is no longer a hospital, but it was converted into condominiums in the gay Castro district, so that right now in the room where my mother held me for the first time, there's probably a gay couple that are having a martini and looking out at the view. Steve Jobs lived almost all of his life in a 30-mile distance on the peninsula of San Francisco. But he invented a technology which in a way has made distance impossible or irrelevant, because you can have the world on that machine in this little fleck of gold dust. You can have the world, this microchip. This is infinite. You don't have to worry about space. So this girl in Massachusetts is walking down the street. This is a true story. No, she's jogging, trying to lose weight in the early morning on a road, on a highway in Massachusetts. She is plugged to the ears with earphones and iPads and iMusic and I Am Me. And she doesn't hear the bus. She doesn't hear the bus coming behind her. Bang! All over the world now, there are little acolytes of Steve Jobs who walk around the city streets looking, I don't know what they're looking at. They're communicating with the dead. They're texting constantly. They're texting. Sometimes couples walk down the street, each texting presumably to different people, or maybe to each other. There are people on phones all over the world who cannot get away from their phone. It is a disease, but Steve Jobs has given us this notion that place is irrelevant. You're walking down a boulevard in Paris, you're walking down Commonwealth Avenue in Massachusetts. It doesn't matter. What matters is the world on this screen. You're listening to a tiresome man who thinks he's an Indian. It doesn't matter. You can go on Lady Gaga's website right now. But the immigrants who came to California were so interesting to me because they had thrown custom aside. Lucille Ball got in the car and she drove across the country. There were so many young women came to California to become movie stars that Hollywood didn't know what to do with them. Hollywood called them extra girls. And the beauty queen from Nebraska, who was so pretty, she went to California and Hollywood used her, or didn't. And she ended up a manicurist, or maybe she ended up cutting hair. But this excitement of changing your life, trying something new, going someplace different, this migrant's excitement has always been part of my life. We wrote a novel in California called Grapes of Wrath, The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck's great novel, about migrant farm workers from Arkansas and Oklahoma. We called them Arkies and Okies. And they crossed Highway 66 to come to California to work as farm workers. And their truck was steaming and it was overcrowded with bodies and mattresses. But when we made a movie of it, all the people in the movie were these internal immigrants who'd come to Hollywood. John Ford came to Hollywood, the director from Maine. Henry Fonda, who played Tom Joad, came to Hollywood from Nebraska, and so it went. The people who defined my youth were people from elsewhere. And then when I was a young man, and I'd come out of the closet in California, San Francisco was filling with these sexual refugees, these young men who'd come out on Greyhound bus to come out of the closet. Now most of them are dead, a whole generation dead, gone. But I lived among people who had come from a long way, sometimes from foreign countries, to become what they thought was themselves. That's migration too. I'm going to go to school today. I'm going to end up with my head shot by some loony in Pakistan, but I'm going to go to school today in Birmingham, England. I am so intent on it. Something happened in America in the 19th century. The boats came sagging into New York Harbor, and America saw the immigrants, and we didn't like them. They smelled. They smelled from their journey. We couldn't understand most of them when they spoke, and the grandmothers were all dressed in black. I don't know what the grandmothers were doing, mourning somebody who died 40 years ago. And the grandmothers had no expression to their eyes. We didn't know what to make of them. What should we call these people? Benjamin Franklin, my Benjamin Franklin, hero, childhood hero of mine, who put his life at risk in lightning with a kite. Benjamin Franklin, who went to Paris and was a great diplomat. Benjamin Franklin, who was a great lover. Benjamin Franklin, the inventor. He said about you that I'm not sure we should call Germans white people. He said, Southern Germans especially, he said, are so swarthy. And the Irish, we were not at all sure about the Irish. The Irish were not white when they came to America. You had to earn your way. Noel Ignatieff has a book called How the Irish Became White in America. You should read it. How the Irish become white in America is by distinguishing themselves from black, by proving to America that they were not black. Well, interesting story, Richard. No, that's not the story. The story is what happened in the next generation, my generation, the first generation. The kids, the American kids, who didn't have an accent anymore, who seemed like American kids, who were changing their names, dropping their names, who had names like Skip and Troy. And America said, these kids aren't so bad. We recognize these kids. And then the grandchildren came. And the grandchildren were building and inventing. And they were fully at home in America. They didn't know Ireland. They didn't know Sicily. They didn't know Germany. They were here. And America said, well done. Something happens in the intellectual history of this country in those years when America begins to look at the immigrant children and we begin to see our story in their progress. We begin to say, you can come here with nothing and you can end up over here running this corporation. That's the American dream. We had never used that expression before the immigrants came. The immigrants told us that America could be a place where you could become. And people who were born here suddenly started saying, we are all immigrants because of the dream. What's happened now in America, and no one says this, no one will say this tomorrow probably, is that we don't believe in the dream anymore. And when we see the immigrants coming, the poor ones, we don't say that they are us. We don't expect them to change their lives, and therefore we don't expect our life to be changed because our lives are not changing. We're no longer progressing one generation from the other. When my parents came to this country, they bought a little house. They always owned a house. I don't own a house. Never have. Isn't that curious? People used to go to Boston College maybe just a few years ago. And the reason I went to Boston College is because I'm going to get a job at the end of it. It's going to be a better job than my parents who are helping to pay my way through. Now we're not so sure. We're not so sure that the line goes this way. It may go this way. And so we see immigrants, and they no longer tell the story of our lives because our lives no longer are defined by a dream. The young immigrants now, the children of immigrants, are talking about a DREAM Act, and I like that word dream. And there is now talk that the Republican Party is rethinking the immigration reform because they have seen the numbers. But do not be fooled. In the opinion of most Americans, I think the immigrant is a drag, the poor immigrant. Why can't they wait in line like those middle-class immigrants all over the world who wait for their visas? They stand in lines in Jakarta, they stand in lines in Lille, France. Why can they cheat? How can they cheat just coming into line, the leaf blower? The American in me, and I'm a registered Republican, I will say this to no one but to you. You must, and I say this in the home of the Kennedys, but I will never repeat this to any friend of mine. The American in me says, you can't have a country without borders, not in this world. You better know who's coming across your line tonight. The American in me says, okay, we'll have immigration reform tomorrow. This Apple computer group and I will all arrange an immigration reform bill and pass it by Steve Jobs' wife, who's been giving lots of money to immigrant children's funds for education. Steve Jobs' wife. We will come up with an immigration reform bill that will take care of the 12 million people we have here now. When do you want to sign it? Let's sign it tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock when the conference begins. Tomorrow morning at 9:15, there will be new people coming across the line. The poor will always be coming. And what do we do with these? The Republican asks. I was at a wonderful place called the Casa de los Pobres in Tijuana, Mexico, talking to this midget nun who runs the place. And she gets a lot of her money from Germany, from German philanthropies. And the Germans are always complaining. I can't do a German accent, but if I could, I would. Complaining, sister, you don't have a problem for solving the poverty of Tijuana. You just are dealing with the problems of Tijuana. This is the same complaint they made against Mother Teresa. Christopher Hitchens, in one of the litany of his complaints in his dreadful, dreadful book, that dreadful, dreadful, dreadful man complained that Mother Teresa only picked up the bodies as they were dying and bathed the untouchables. But she didn't solve the problems of India. The nun said, well, I don't have any ideas about solving the problems of Mexico. The midget nun says, besides which there's a food line that's going to begin to form at 11:30. And I have used the money of Germany to feed the Mexican peasants. And today there is some money for beans and rice and lard. That's one of the essentials for Mexican cooking. And maybe it's just a little extra money, some fruit and vegetables. And they come. They are lining up at 11 o'clock to come. And there is no solution. You understand, there is no solution. The poor are multiplied by the poor, are multiplied by the poor. I'm going to say one last thing about Roger Mahony, the retired Cardinal of Los Angeles. Roger Mahony was supposed to be here at this convention. He's not. What has happened to Roger Mahony is that his failure to manage the child abuse scandal in Los Angeles was made public in a series of documents that were released to the press. And his long tenure as cardinal in Los Angeles was seriously damaged, his reputation. There are stories. I was reading one on the plane coming in last night in the New Yorker of a priest who was abusing a Mexican migrant child. And when the father found out about it, he came to the priest, complained to the priest, and said that he was going to the police. And the priest said, if you report me to the police, I'm going to report you to the immigration service. That's how bad it was. Roger Mahony was, by his own reckoning, never trained for the scandal that was all around him. He didn't know how to see it. He didn't know how to deal with it. He sent priests to rehabilitation centers in the desert, and then he reassigned them to parishes. We know the story. What you might not notice, and the reason he had been invited to this conference, is that he was a fierce advocate for migrants in California and the Southwest, particularly illegal migrants, at a time when no one else was talking. There was a congressman in Washington, one of these guys who come on Fox TV all the time, who said that he was going to introduce a bill to make it a felony to give any aid to an illegal immigrant. You give him a bottle of water, give him $1, you give him a ride, felony. Roger Mahony said, if you do that, I will organize the largest collection of nuns and priests in the largest act of civil disobedience that you've seen. And the Republican congressman pulled back. I tell you this because I don't know whether Boston College is a Catholic college. I don't know whether it's a Christian college. I don't know whether it's a religious college. I was last at a Jesuit university in Illinois, which shall be nameless, and I asked the dean if at dinner, well, I'd been to a Baptist college just before that in Appalachia, and they offered me a drink at dinner, and I said, oh, I'd love one, and it turned out to be punch. So when the Jesuit said, would you like a drink? I said, yeah, I guess I would. He said, what would you like? I said, could I have a gin and tonic? He said, yeah. He said, we have 8 kinds of gin. So suddenly I knew why I was a Catholic. Anyway, I asked him, I said, since I went to grammar school and high school and Catholic school, Sisters of Mercy, Christian Brothers, and so much of my formative years was conducted within a religious format. There were other kids of other religions in these schools, but it was clearly Catholic schools. The prayer, the crucifix. Is your university a Catholic university, as I recognize that term? And he looked at me over his gin and tonic. He said, beats me. I mention this only because in the success of schools like this, to turn us into middle-class Americans, which is what I am, there is in this progress what shall I say, an inclination sometimes to let us forget the part of the tradition, the people who built these schools, the families who built these places, to forget why we are here, which it seems to me is not only to be an American, but to maintain certain spiritual values. And I don't even mean that they are Christian. I'm talking about a Jew named Jesus who tells the most interesting story one day to other Jews about a good Samaritan. It's an astonishing story because the Samaritans were another tribe altogether. And it is the Samaritan who's the charitable hero of the story. One wonders about the Jews who are listening at this strange story. It would be like a Catholic priest talking today about the good Muslim who was the only one who picked up the body on the street. I tell you this because at some level, what we are engaged in here is a religious question about poverty, but increasingly, since last week, the election of this Argentine Pope, what we have learned about the Vatican, even those creaky old cardinals, is that they knew the future. And they knew that the future was not Europe, that the European churches are monuments to emptiness and tourism. What they knew is that the capital of Catholicism now is in the Americas, and not in North America, in Latin America. What they knew is that the fastest growing region of Catholicism is Africa in the world. And we Americans think, well, this is kind of odd. We've always thought of ourselves as a God-blessed country. God bless America, the politician says as we go to war. And now we find out that the activity is there. Well, we built a fence. I can't see over the wall. I can't see what's on the other side. I can hear this singing. There is something coming this way that is not, as some of my fellow Republicans have said, a criminal energy. There is a religious energy coming from the South. It is coming in many cases, singing. The world population now of the Mormon Church is Spanish-speaking. Mitt Romney didn't mention that, even though he was once a bishop of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Evangelical Protestantism is spreading now in countries like Brazil, the largest Catholic country in the world, at such a rate that the prediction is that by the year 2070, Latin America will be Protestant, and not only Protestant, but evangelical Protestant. And now there are priests in Paris from Africa, because there are no European priests. And there are nuns in Los Angeles from Costa Rica. And we think illegal. We think the South is a criminal energy coming into this country, challenging our law and order society. I tell you, I met some young men from a group called Victory Outreach in Tijuana, Mexico. Victory Outreach is an evangelical church that deals with kids who have serious drug and gang problems along the border. These are kids who have tattoos coming up over their necks. And I met this little one who looked like an Indian from some kind of tableau of the 16th century. And he said he was coming to the United States to convert the United States to Protestantism. And I thought, that's interesting. 5 centuries after Columbus, an Indian is coming to the United States to convert the United States to Catholicism, to Protestantism. And he said, those Americans, he said, are so sad. He said, they seem broken to me. I want to save their souls. Thank you very much.